A modern whale shares its habitat with salmon and sharks, yet it remains a biological outsider in the sea. As air-breathing, warm-blooded mammals that nurse their young, whales are the products of an extensive evolutionary U-turn, a lineage that migrated from dry earth back into the water. The fossil record traces this journey back 50 million years to Pakicetus, a hoofed predator the size of a wolf. While looking entirely terrestrial, its skull structure, specifically the dense bones surrounding the ear, contains the exact diagnostic signature found in modern whales. As these early ancestors spent more time hunting in estuaries and avoiding larger land predators, their bodies adapted. Hind limbs shrink and eventually disappeared. Forelimbs flattened into paddles for steering, and their spines elongated to power a massive tail fluke. Every inch of their aquatic anatomy was earned through millions of years of anatomical reengineering, transforming a land-dwelling scavenger into the ocean's ultimate survivor. Mastery of the deep ocean requires surviving conditions that would kill almost any other mammal. It is an environment of absolute darkness, near freezing temperatures, and crushing hydrostatic pressures. To counter the cold, whales developed blubber. This thick layer of specialized, fat-rich tissue acts as thermal armor, trapping body heat so effectively that these animals can thrive in the Arctic without losing core temperature. For navigation, certain species evolved the spermaceti organ. Filled with a waxy liquid, this biological tool functions as an acoustic lens, focusing sound waves to map the abyss and locate prey through echolocation. Other whales developed baleen, massive, fringed plates made of keratin. These hang from the upper jaw and function as a sophisticated filtration system, allowing the whale to sieve tons of microscopic prey from the seawater in a single mouthful. These biological triumphs made the whale a master of the sea. However, they also matched the resource requirements of 19th century industry with terrifying precision. The very traits that allowed them to survive the deep ocean eventually turned their bodies into the most valuable raw materials on Earth. Early whaling, practiced by groups like the Basques, was a localized subsistence activity, but the 18th and 19th centuries saw a massive expansion into a global commercial enterprise, driven by a desperate need for energy and lubrication. Industry mapped the whale's anatomy directly to the marketplace. Blubber was rendered into oil to light the world's growing cities. The spermaceti wax from sperm whales was even more prized. It burned with a bright, clean flame and provided the premier lubricant for the high-speed machinery of the early Industrial Revolution. Baleen plates found their own commercial niche as a pre-industrial plastic. Because it was strong, flexible, and could be molded with heat, baleen provided the structural stays for umbrellas, buggy whips, and the rigid framing of women's corsets. This was a brutal rendering process. Crews stripped the blubber from surfaces in long sheets, boiled it in iron vats on the ship's deck, and packaged the results into standardized barrels. The ocean's greatest survivors were being reduced to global units of trade. While we often associate the 19th century with coal and iron, the infrastructure of that era was physically illuminated and lubricated by the processed bodies of marine mammals. Literary myths like Moby Dick often frame the hunt as a heroic struggle between man and beast. The historical records tell a different story, one of a grueling, mechanized global enterprise focused on maximizing yield. The industry relied on a workforce trapped in a cycle of debt and danger. Voyages often lasted 3 or 4 years, pushing men to work in some of the most hazardous conditions on the planet for a share of the eventual profit. This labor force was remarkably diverse. Native American whalemen, such as the Wampanoag, leveraged their maritime expertise to secure positions of authority and pay that were largely unavailable to them in the racially oppressive society on land. As the closer coastal whale populations were wiped out, the industry turned to technological acceleration to maintain its margins. Human engineering began to move faster than the whale's multi-year reproductive cycle could sustain. The introduction of deck-mounted harpoon cannons and explosive-tipped projectiles ended the era of the hand-thrown spear. Combined with steam-powered winches and steel-hulled ships, the hunt was no longer a chase, it was a harvest. This technological surge neutralized the whale's biological advantages. The same evolutionary traits that took 50 million years to perfect were now being overwhelmed by decades of human mechanical innovation. By the 20th century, the slaughter reached its peak. Mechanized factory ships acted as floating refineries, capable of pulling 100-ton carcasses onto a stern ramp and processing them entirely at sea, far from the eyes of the public. This chart contrasts the whale's slow reproduction, the flat line, with a vertical spike of over 50,000 kills by 1930. The data reveals a sequential collapse. As fleets exhausted right whales, they pivoted to blue, then fin, then sei, systematically decimating the entire order. It took 50 million years for whales to transition from land to the apex of the ocean. In less than a century, industrial extraction brought that entire evolutionary lineage to the edge of total erasure. By the 1970s, the near-total disappearance of these animals triggered a rare global reaction. Public awareness shifted toward the ecological vacuum being left in the ocean, and international pressure began to mount against the remaining whaling fleets. This pressure culminated in 1982, when the International Whaling Commission adopted a formal moratorium on commercial whaling. It was a hard-fought regulatory battle that sought to halt the industrial momentum that had defined the previous 2 centuries. This moratorium signaled a shift in international priorities. For the first time, global regulatory bodies moved to reclassify these animals from commercial inventory into a protected class, prioritizing the survival of a species over its immediate industrial yield. Whales spent 50 million years evolving to master the deep. In less than a century, human ingenuity nearly wiped them out. The future of the species now rests on whether our capacity for restraint can match our power to consume.